title. The Girl Who Kept the Shore. Consider, if you will, the peculiar cruelty of a single moment, how it can become a splinter lodged so deep beneath the skin that the body builds itself around it, forgetting the wound ever came from outside. We mark our lives by such moments: the door that closed, the hand we didn't take, the afternoon we looked away. Julie Marsh was 6 years old this summer. She learned that the world could swallow you whole and smile while doing it. She would not learn until much, much later what the world had swallowed in her place. Welcome, dear traveler, to the geography of the lost, a stretch of sand and memory somewhere in the middle distance of the Twilight Zone. The summer of 1956 smelled like coconut oil and spilled Coca-Cola and the particular salty rot of low tide. And Julie Marsh thought it was the greatest smell in the world. She walked between her parents on the boardwalk, holding both their hands, lifted into a swing with every third step: 1, 2, we, while the sun pressed down on Coney Island like a warm iron on a cotton shirt. Her father, Frank, wore his good trousers rolled to the knee and a white undershirt that had gone a little yellow from too many summers. Her mother, Evelyn, had pinned her dark hair under a wide straw hat and carried a canvas bag stuffed with towels, a thermos of lemonade, 3 deviled eggs wrapped in waxed paper, and a tube of coppertone that had leaked and made one corner of the bag smell medicinal and sweet. Julie had on her bathing suit, red with white polka dots, and new rubber sandals that had already raised a blister on her left heel, which she was not going to mention because if she mentioned it, they might go home early. She was sick. She knew how to suffer silently when it counted. The beach at Coney Island on a Saturday in late July was less a beach and more an idea of a beach. A rumor of sand somewhere beneath all the people. Striped umbrellas packed together like scales on a fish, children shrieking at the water's edge. A man selling Italian ices from a cart that said Luigi's Finest in red paint, and Julie knew from the moment she saw it that she would die if she didn't have one. Not immediately, but soon. She filed this away. They found a square of sand roughly the size of a dining room table near the middle of the beach, and Frank spread out the blanket with a snap that sent a little cascade of other people's sand sideways into a woman's open Reader's Digest. The woman looked up. Frank gave her the grin he used for everything, the one Evelyn called his lucky not-to-get-punched grin, and the woman went back to her magazine. "Stay where I can see you," Evelyn said, pulling Julie's dark braids forward over her shoulders, in the ritual check she performed before anything, the same way she turned the stove burners twice before leaving the apartment. Julie was a small, serious-faced child with enormous dark eyes and the habit of watching adults the way a scientist watches an experiment, cataloging every microexpression, filing everything away for later analysis. She watched her mother's hands smoothing her braids. She watched her father already closing his eyes and turning his face up to the sun like a plant. "Where's Luigi's cart?" Julie asked. "Later," said Evelyn. "How much later?" "Julie." That was the end of that, for now. She sat at the edge of the blanket and dug her fingers into the sand, which was fine and hot on top and cool and slightly damp just an inch below the surface, and she thought about how the beach was like a secret, how things looked one way on top and completely different underneath if you just pushed a little. She thought about how the ocean kept coming toward her and then changing its mind, over and over like it couldn't decide. She thought about a lot of things. She was that kind of child. After a while her father was asleep. She could tell by the way his chest moved, and her mother was reading a paperback with a picture of a woman running from a house on the cover, which Julie found confusing, since the woman on the cover looked pretty fast, and the house didn't look like it could catch her. She shifted closer to the water, then a little closer. She wasn't going anywhere. She was just watching a hermit crab drag itself across the wet sand at the waterline, which was the most purposeful thing she had ever seen a creature do. It seemed to know exactly where it was going. She envied it. She followed it. Not far. Just a little. The crab moved laterally along the waterline, and so did she, bent double with her hands on her knees, shoes in one hand because the wet sand was better without them. The crab stopped. She crouched and examined it. It had been somewhere and was going somewhere else, and whatever had happened to it before was over, and whatever would happen next hadn't started yet. And right now it existed purely in the present tense, which Julie thought must be a very good way to live. She straightened up and turned around. The beach looked like the same beach in every direction. Striped umbrellas, packed bodies, children, noise. She had walked perhaps 50 yards along the waterline, and the geometry of the crowd had closed behind her. The way water closes behind a thrown stone, without seam, without evidence. She looked for her parents' blanket. She looked for her father's white undershirt. She looked for her mother's straw hat. She could not find them. This was the moment, though she wouldn't understand this for another 40 years, that everything changed. Not the getting lost part. Children got lost at Coney Island every summer Saturday, and the lifeguard stations had a whole system for it, with a particular kind of whistle signal. But what happened a few seconds after? What happened when she stopped scanning the crowd and looked, instead, at the nearest face? The face belonged to a girl. She was standing at the very edge of the surf, feet in the water up to her shins, in a red bathing suit with white polka dots that was, and Julie examined this with the same scientific attention she gave to everything, identical to her own. The same cut, the same rubber straps over the shoulders, the same small ruffle at the hip that Julie's mother had called too fancy when she bought it, and then bought it anyway. The girl had dark hair in 2 braids, and she was small, and she was facing the ocean, and she was Julie. Not like Julie, not similar to Julie. She was Julie, same height, same dark braids, same blister shoe held in the same left hand. Julie stared at her own back from 50 feet away, and felt something in her chest go very still, the way sound goes still before a thunderclap. The other girl turned around. The face was her face, exactly, dark eyes with that slight over-seriousness her mother always teased her about. The small scar beside the left eyebrow from the incident with the coffee table when she was 4. The freckle on her upper lip, which Julie had always hated, and which her grandmother called, "Your beauty mark, darling." They looked at each other. "Hi," the other girl said. Julie's mind, being a child's mind, processed this less as horror, and more as a serious problem that required methodical thinking. She had seen her reflection in mirrors. She had seen her reflection in windows. This was like that, except the reflection was in the open air and at a distance, and there was no glass. She ran through what she knew about the world, which was considerable for 6, though of course incomplete, and found no category for this. "Hi," she said back, because she had been raised to be polite. "Are you lost?" the other girl asked. "Yes," Julie said. And then, because this seemed only fair, "Are you?" The other girl thought about this for a moment with an expression Julie recognized as her own best thinking face. "I don't know yet," she said. Julie walked toward her. This seemed like the thing to do. They met in the wet sand at the waterline, ankle deep in a retreating wave that was cold enough to make both of them flinch at the same moment, identically. "I was following a crab," Julie said. "I know," the other girl said. "How do you know?" The other girl looked at her steadily. "Because I was following the crab too." This was the logic of dreams, Julie thought, even then at 6. She knew what dream logic felt like. The way things made sense in their own rules, except that the sand was real, and the cold water was real, and the sting of her blister was real, and in dreams, the things that should be sharp always went soft. "Are you me?" Julie asked. The other girl seemed to consider whether to answer carefully, the way adults did when children asked questions that had answers the adults didn't want to give. Then she said, "I'm from the ocean." Julie looked at the ocean. It was green-gray and enormous and going about its business. "That's not an answer," she said. "It's the only one I have," the other girl said. She reached out and took Julie's hand, the hand without the shoe in it, and her hand was the same temperature as Julie's hand, and the grip was the same grip. And this was the strangest thing yet, stranger than the face, stranger than the bathing suit, because Julie's hand knew itself and knew this was not a different hand. It was the same. It was hers. "We should find your parents," the other girl said. "They're somewhere back there. Come on." They walked together along the waterline, side by side, both still holding shoes, and the crowd did a peculiar thing. It parted. Not obviously, not like the sea had parted for Moses, which Julie had seen depicted in a picture book, but people stepped aside and looked elsewhere, and conversations went on, and no one saw 2 identical small girls in identical red polka-dot bathing suits walking together, which was the kind of thing that should have caused a considerable amount of staring. It was as though the air around them had made a private agreement with the beach. The other girl navigated with certainty, turning away from the waterline into the packed maze of blankets and umbrellas and bodies, and Julie followed because the grip on her hand was her own grip, and she trusted her own grip even when she didn't understand it. "There," the other girl said. Julie looked 20 feet away was her parents' blanket, her father still asleep, her mother with the book, though the book was now closed in her lap, and her eyes were scanning the beach with the particular focused terror of a parent who has just discovered an absence. The going white look, the sitting forward look, the look Julie had seen once when she'd hidden inside the department store clothing rack, and her mother's face had appeared between the coats like the most frightened moon she'd ever seen. "Mom," Julie said. Evelyn's head snapped toward her, and it happened in the space between 1 second and the next, so fast and so ordinary that Julie would spend decades, entire decades, trying to reconstruct whether she had actually seen it. She looked at her mother's face, which was flooding with relief, and in the same instant, the hand in her hand simply was not there anymore. Not pulled away, not released, not there, the way a word vanishes when you've stared at it too long. She turned. The beach was the beach, the crowd was the crowd. A wave came in and went out. She ran to her mother. Evelyn wrapped her arms around Julie so hard that the straw hat went sideways, and Julie pressed her face into her mother's shoulder and breathed the copper-tone smell, and the thermos lemonade smell, and the smell of her mother's particular warm skin, and felt the world put itself back together with a click. "Don't you ever?" her mother started, and then she couldn't finish it. Frank woke up from his father's sleep, at the volume of the reunion, and sat up with his hair going in 4 directions. "What happened? What happened?" She wandered off. Evelyn said, the words clipped in the way that meant later. "Frank, there will be a whole conversation about this, and you will not enjoy it." "I was following a crab," Julie said into her mother's shoulder. "A crab," Frank repeated. It knew where it was going. There was a silence, and then Frank let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but not quite. They packed up when the shadows started going long and the crowd thinned to the serious beachgoers and the teenagers who had nowhere better to be. Julie got her Italian ice lemon, which was the best color, and ate it on the boardwalk while the lights of the amusement park blinked on in the early dusk, and the Ferris wheel turned against a sky-going apricot at the edge. Her blister hurt. She didn't mention it. She thought about the hand, the temperature of the hand, the way her own grip felt from the outside. She didn't tell her parents. Not because she was afraid they wouldn't believe her. She knew they wouldn't, and this seemed reasonable, but because it felt like something that belonged to her, like the cool dampness under the hot surface of the sand, a secret underneath. She thought about the other girl's words. "I'm from the ocean," and turned them over the way she turned interesting shells over, looking for what was underneath. She was 6, and she didn't have the language for what she was thinking, but the shape of the thought was there, something about what it meant to be lost, and what it meant to find something, and whether those could be the same thing. The Italian ice melted faster than she could eat it, and ran down her wrist in a cold yellow stream, and she licked it off and watched the Ferris wheel turn. 40 years passed. This is both a longer and shorter interval than it sounds, depending on which direction you're traveling through it. Julie Marsh became Julie Connolly at 23, and Julie Connolly became someone who thought about that afternoon rarely and then more often, the way a bruise you've stopped noticing suddenly makes itself known when the weather changes. She became a person the way everyone does, by accumulation, by accident, by the slow barnacling of experience onto the original hull. She had a daughter, Mara, and she lived in the same neighborhood in Brooklyn where she'd grown up because life has a gravitational pull, and some people find it easier to orbit closer to the original body. She worked as an office manager for a pediatric dental practice in Park Slope, which she had not planned on but which suited her. She was good at organization and calm, and her ability to watch a room without being watched suited a waiting room full of anxious children and anxious parents. Frank died in 1987. Evelyn got slower and smaller in the way that old people did, though her mind stayed sharp and they had Sunday dinners until Mara was 14, and then they had Sunday dinners less often. And then Evelyn had a small stroke and went to a facility in Queens, and Julie visited twice a week and brought the things her mother wanted, certain magazines, a particular brand of butterscotch candy, photographs. One Tuesday in October, Mara was 15. It was 1996. Julie went through a box of her mother's things that had come over from the apartment and found, in a manila envelope inside a shoebox inside a larger box, 3 photographs from the summer of 1956. Two were the ones she expected. Her parents on the boardwalk, squinting into the sun. The three of them on the blanket, Julie's father holding her up over his head in the way that made her mother's face go tight with anticipated catastrophe. She smiled at these, filed them back. The third one she didn't recognize at first. It was a wide shot of the beach, amateur angle, slightly overexposed in the way of photographs from that era. The crowd, the umbrellas, the water glittering, and in the foreground, close to the camera, close enough that the image was sharper than the rest, two small girls standing side by side at the waterline in matching red polka-dot bathing suits, both holding shoes, both dark-haired, both with their free hands clasped together. Julie sat down on her kitchen floor. She was 46 years old and she sat down on the floor because her legs went away from her. She had never questioned the memory. She had never put it in the box of things that weren't real. Dreams, television, the stories she'd made up in her own head as a child, which were vivid and detailed, and sometimes confused her briefly. She had kept it in a different box, the box of things I don't understand yet. And she had carried that box carefully for 40 years. The way you carry something you know is fragile without being sure why. She picked up the photograph and looked at the two girls, looked at her own face, the freckle, the scar, the braids, looked at the other face, the same face. She turned the photograph over, in her mother's handwriting, in the particular blue ballpoint her mother had used for everything. Coney Island, July 1956. Julie and H. And the sentence stopped. There was a space and then nothing, not crossed out, not erased, just the sentence stopping in the middle the way sentences sometimes do when the hand stops knowing what to write. Julie sat on the floor for a long time. She couldn't ask her mother. Evelyn's memory had become a house with certain rooms locked, some days many rooms, some days only a few, and the stroke had made the locks worse. Julie brought the photograph on Thursday and held it up in the good light by the window. "Mom, this photo—" The two girls. Evelyn looked at it for a long time with the expression Julie had catalogued as working on it. Then she said, "You were always at the water. I couldn't keep you back from the water." "Who is the other girl?" Evelyn looked at the picture again. "You went wandering," she said, "after the crab." "I know." "Mom, who is the other girl?" Evelyn's face did something complicated. "You were so frightened," she said softly. "I could see it from a mile away. My poor baby, all by yourself out there." Julie paused. "Was I by myself when I came back?" "Yes," Evelyn said, immediately, without the working on it face. Then she seemed to hear what she'd said. And she looked at the photograph again, and the complicated thing happened in her face again. "Mom, you always came back to me," Evelyn said. "That's what mattered." It was Julie understood the only answer she was going to get. She slipped the photograph into her bag. She took Mara to Coney Island that November, off-season, the beach nearly empty, the amusement park shut until spring. They walked the boardwalk in wool coats, their breath coming visible in the cold air off the water. Mara was 15 and therefore principally interested in whether the trip counted as exercise and whether she could get funnel cake from the one stand that stayed open year-round, answers to which were, respectively, probably not, and yes. Julie let her daughter run ahead to the funnel cake stand and stood at the boardwalk railing looking at the beach. November had stripped it down to its true self: gray sand, gray water, gray sky, the geometry uncluttered by all the summer business of being alive. The water came in and went out. A single gull stood at the waterline performing the same facing, the sea posture that the other girl had been standing in when Julie first saw her, and the resemblance was so absurd that Julie almost laughed. She thought about what she knew and what she didn't know. She knew the temperature of the hand, the grip, the scar, the photograph. She didn't know what from the ocean meant, what the other girl had been, exactly. What she had been doing there, whether she was still there in some sense or gone. She thought, standing at the boardwalk railing in her wool coat in 1996, about a thing she had read once in a magazine article about physics, about how some experiments suggested that particles could be connected across distance in ways that shouldn't be possible, so that measuring one particle immediately changed what happened to its twin regardless of the space between them. The magazine article had been written to be understood by people like Julie, which meant it had cut most of the actual physics out, but the image stayed with her. Two things that were the same thing, separated, each one carrying the shape of the other. She had a thought that she immediately dismissed as the sentimental kind of thought you had on cold November beaches. She had it anyway, she thought. What if being lost had created her? Not the being lost itself, the fear, the scan of the crowd, the cold water at the ankles, but the other girl. The one who'd found her. The one who was made of ocean. Who knew exactly where to go. Who held her hand with her own hand. What if a version of Julie had gotten so lost at 6 that she'd become the thing that found herself? What if the ocean had made a working copy out of sand and salt and terror? Just for the 45 minutes it took to lead a small, dark-eyed girl back to the geometry of her parents' blanket, and then had taken it back. This was nonsense, she told herself. She looked at the gray water going in and going out. I don't know yet, the other girl had said, when asked if she was lost. Mara came back with funnel cake and found her mother at the railing looking at the water. What are you looking at? Mara asked. I got lost here once, Julie said. When I was your age, younger, 6. That's not my age, younger than your age. Mara leaned on the railing beside her, pulling off a piece of funnel cake, dusting the powdered sugar off her fingers onto her coat front in the way that would have made Julie say something if she'd been paying full attention. Were you scared? Julie thought about it. Not as scared as I should have been, she said. Something helped me find my way back. What? Julie looked at the water. I'm not sure, she said. I've been thinking about it for 40 years. Mara looked at her mother sideways. That's a long time to think about one afternoon. Some afternoons are like that. They stood there in the cold eating funnel cake and watching the November ocean do its repetitive work, and Julie thought about the photograph in her bag, which she'd been carrying for 6 weeks, because she hadn't figured out yet what to do with it. She thought about her mother's sentence that stopped in the middle. She thought about the scar on her own eyebrow, visible when she looked in the mirror. Had it been on the left or the right? Had the other girls been on the same side? Had it been a mirror image or a true copy? She couldn't remember. She hadn't thought to check. She'd been 6. She thought about the hermit crab and its extraordinary purposefulness. She thought about how she had followed it without any real intention. The way you follow certain thoughts, not because you decided to, but because the thought was already moving and you were already moving with it, and by the time you noticed, the shore was further away than you'd meant. Mara handed her the last piece of funnel cake. Julie ate it. The powdered sugar went everywhere. Evelyn died the following spring, April, still cold, the trees just starting to consider the idea of leaves. Julie sat with her in the room in Queens for the last 3 days, and on the last day, in the hour before the end, Evelyn surfaced from the half-sleep that had taken her and looked at Julie with an expression of sudden, clear focus that Julie had not seen in years, the rooms all unlocked at once, every light on. The photograph, Evelyn said. Her voice was almost gone by then, but the words were precise. Julie leaned close. I have it, Mom. I took it, Evelyn said. I saw you at the waterline. I'd been looking for you. I was terrified. A pause, a labor of breath, and I saw 2 of you. 2 girls. I had my camera around my neck, and I didn't think. I just took the picture. I know, Julie said. I never knew what to write on the back. Evelyn's eyes were very clear. I didn't know her name. I didn't know what she was. I didn't. She stopped. Then, she brought you back to me. Yes, Julie said. I watched her let go of your hand, Evelyn said, and I watched her walk back toward the water, and a long pause in which the labor of breathing was audible. I was so relieved that you were back that I almost didn't notice she was gone. And then I turned around to look, and she was gone, Julie said. Yes, Evelyn closed her eyes. I should have called out to her. I should have, I don't know, something. She was all right, Julie said. It came out with a certainty that surprised her. Her mother's eyes stayed closed. How do you know? She was from the ocean, Julie said. She told me. There was quiet in the room for a while. Outside, April was doing its work, the trees reconsidering, the light getting longer, the world rebuilding its argument for itself. Julie held her mother's hand. After a while, Evelyn said so quietly that Julie almost missed it. She looked just like you. I know, Mom, but her eyes were different. Julie lifted her head. Her mother's eyes were still closed. Different? How? Not frightened, Evelyn said. Your eyes were frightened. You were lost and frightened. The voice was going thinner, almost wind. Her eyes were a long breath. Like she'd already seen everything. Like she was very, Very, the breath ended. The sentence didn't. Julie drove home from Queens in the April dark, thinking about different eyes, not frightened, already seen everything. Very, what? Old calm, free. She thought about a version of herself that had no fear, that had been made entirely from the act of being lost, and had therefore what? Come out the other side of it? Carried it somewhere else? Been forged in the specific fire of a 6-year-old's abandonment into something that the original couldn't become, while the original was still 6 and still afraid, and still standing at the waterline looking for her parents? She thought about the walk back, the certainty of navigation, the way the crowd had opened. She thought about, I don't know yet, which had been an answer about being lost, but maybe was also an answer about something else, whether she'd served her purpose, whether she'd be going back, whether the ocean wanted its material returned. She thought about the hand in her hand, warm and the same, the grip. She pulled over on Atlantic Avenue and cried for her mother for a while, and then she drove home. Mara left for college in the fall. Julie reorganized the apartment the way you do when a subtraction occurs, filling the space differently, relearning the geometry. She found the photograph on her desk where she'd left it 6 months ago and stood holding it in the October light. She'd had it scanned the previous spring, had a print made, had a copy tucked into her mother's casket alongside other photographs, not this one, but others from that summer. She'd been uncertain about this one. It still felt like it belonged to her. Specifically, she looked at the 2 girls at the waterline. Here was what she had never told anyone, not Mara, not her husband before the marriage came apart, not her mother while her mother could have heard it properly. She had felt, in the 45 minutes of being lost, more completely herself than she had felt in any moment before or since. Something about the dissolution, the losing of orientation, the stripping away of the known landmarks had clarified her. She'd been frightened, but the fear had been clean. She'd been alone, but the aloneness had been honest. And when the other girl appeared, the recognition had not been, there's something strange and frightening, but instead, with perfect 6-year-old logic, oh, there I am, as if she'd been waiting her whole short life to look up and see herself coming. She put the photograph on the wall, the kitchen wall where she'd see it every morning. She stood back and looked at it from across the room. 2 small girls in identical red bathing suits with their hands linked, standing in the surf, looking in different directions, one toward the crowd and one toward the open water, as if between them they were watching everything, as if between them nothing could be missed. She went and made coffee and thought about her mother's last unfinished sentence. Very peaceful, she thought. That was the word, she felt certain. 40 years later, in her kitchen in Brooklyn with October outside and the photograph on the wall, and the coffee making its sounds, she felt certain the word was peaceful, as if the other girl had never been lost at all, as if she lived in the losing, as if the losing was her country and she was perfectly at home there, walking its borders with the calm authority of someone who had always known where everything was because she was made of exactly the thing that was missing. She went back to Coney Island in the winter, alone this time, mid-February, which was the month when Coney Island looked most like itself, stripped of pretension. The amusement park closed until April, the boardwalk raw and rattling and honest. She wore her heavy coat and stood at the waterline in the cold where the waves came up over her boots, and she looked at the green-gray water. She didn't say anything. She wasn't sure what she would have said, but she took the photograph out of her coat pocket, the copy she'd made, the one she kept with her, and she looked at it one more time in the February light. The 2 girls, the linked hands, the surf, she thought, about a 6-year-old following a hermit crab toward the water, and how that small act of following, of pure curiosity without caution, had sent the original fracture through everything, had created the lost state that had required the other girl, had generated the meeting at the water, had reached 40 years forward to put her here on this beach in February with this photograph in her hand. She thought, I owe the crab something. She almost smiled. A wave came in, larger than the ones before it, and before she could step back, it washed over her boots completely, soaking her socks. Cold enough to be a genuine statement. She gasped and stumbled back and looked down at her soaked feet, and then absurdly laughed. The ocean, going about its business. She put the photograph away and turned to walk back up the beach. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had the distinct and specific and utterly unexplainable feeling, the feeling she'd carried since she was 6, like a cool dampness under hot sand, that something was watching her go and that it was satisfied, that whatever navigation had been required was complete, that the thing in the water had been keeping her in sight all these years, the way you keep something in sight that you've borrowed from yourself, with care, with patience, and now was watching it return. She walked up the cold winter beach. Behind her, the ocean came in and went out. What does the ocean do with what it takes? Perhaps it holds it carefully, the way a 6-year-old holds a hermit crab, with awe and a certain terror of dropping it. Perhaps it studies the face of what's lost and learns it thoroughly, learns it well enough to wear it in a crisis, to walk back into the noise and heat of a crowded July afternoon and lead one small, frightened self back to its coordinates. Or perhaps there is no it. Perhaps a loss profound enough generates its own recovery, the missing shape pressed so hard into the air that the air takes the impression and walks. Julie Marsh found herself at the shore and never fully came back from the finding. Some of us require the ocean to know who we are. Some of us are already there, waiting in the cold water, having worn ourselves the whole time. A reminder from this corner of the Twilight Zone. The thing that looks back at you from the depths has your eyes, and it has been keeping watch for longer than you know.